Hello, and welcome to Conquering Finale. My name is Jason Lafredo, and today we are once again managing the Score Manager. We are going to start looking at Tablature Staff and how to get those in the Score Manager. It's actually fairly easy. We'll go into the Score Manager, and Finale sets this up pretty nicely for us. All I'm going to do here is just select this first instrument and add an instrument, and when you have that one selected, you'll know that the instrument gets added right below it. So go to Add Instrument and go to the Tablature section, and you'll see that there's actually a whole bunch of preset tablature instruments available to you in Finale right out of the box. In fact, the first three are just for the standard guitar. You have regular tab, tab with no staff name, and tab with stems. And then below that, there's some alternate tunings for the guitar, 7-string guitar, banjos. We've got some basses, dulcimers, lutes, mandolins, ukuleles, all kinds of stuff that you can choose from. So we just choose one of these and select it, and you'll see that Finale will add that guitar tab staff underneath that normal guitar. And you'll see right off the bat that your tab staff is set up the way it should be. You've got 6 lines. You've got the tab clef with no key signature, no time signature. This is sort of standard notation for tab staffs. Now, once you have that tab staff instrument, of course, you can just go into the instrument column here and change it. So if we want to do a different, guitar tuning, we could do that. Or if we want to choose that 7-string guitar, we can, and you'll see that now it will now set it up with 7 lines instead of 6 on that tab staff. We can also change any instrument that exists already, like this normal banjo staff. We can change to a banjo tablature if we really wanted to. Let's go to the banjo D tuning for the heck of it. There we go. And now you'll see that 5-string tab staff for your banjo. Now, there's a couple things going on with these tab staff instruments that I want to point out. The first thing is that when you choose one, what will happen initially is that the notation style will switch from standard to tablature. All right, and there's a bunch of different settings for these tablature staff attributes, which I will get to momentarily. The other thing that happens is in the staff section here, now it says other instead of your standard 5-line, 1-line, or whatever. And when you select that, you'll kind of see what's going on. So this is that 7-string guitar tab, and you'll see that we now have 7 staff lines. And the other major difference is the line spacing for these tab staffs are set a little wider, so we're looking at 0.125 here for the tab staff. I believe the standard staff is 0.08 or something. But there's some other differences, like the position of the repeat dots and all this other stuff, and all the notes and rests sort of are irrelevant on a tab staff anyway. But this is setting up automatically for you. In fact, if I go and switch this back to a regular guitar tab instrument with 6 strings, you'll see that my staff will now have 6 staff lines instead of 7. The other thing that's going on automatically for you is that the staff attributes for these tab staffs are different. Now you notice that there's no key signatures, no time signature, everything as I mentioned. And when you look at the staff attributes for the tab staff, you'll notice that there's some things missing in the items to display, like the augmentation dots, the key signatures, rests, all this other stuff that that just doesn't exist as it should. All right. Now, one thing I want to point out related to this is that there are a few of these tab instruments set up that don't actually behave the way they're supposed to. In fact, the one that really bugs me is this guitar tab with stems. If you choose that, you should get stems on your notes. Actually, let me just copy and paste here. I'm going to show you this in a second. You should get stems on these tablature fingerings, but you don't. You would have to go into the staff attributes and recheck the stems in order to get the stems to appear above the tab staff for that guitar. So it's just something that's a little bit seems to be kind of busted with this instrument setup, particularly with that tab with stems. And I think I'd looked through some of these. I feel like there's a few other ones that may have some oddities to it. So if you're going to use tab staff, just double check that the settings are the way that they're supposed to be. Now, I'm going to get into sort of, working within the tab staffs, both in the simple and speedy entry categories eventually. But the one thing that I wanted to point out in this particular video off the bat is that you can very simply copy and paste notes between a normal staff and a tab staff. Actually, you can just kind of drag it in there. And what you'll see when you do this is Finale will ask you what the lowest fret is that you want to use in the tab staff. This is unique to copying and pasting into a tab staff. And you can use the staff's default lowest fret, which most of the time is set to 0. So if you click OK, you'll see that if there is a 0 fret that can be used, it will be used. We can also copy and paste using a different lowest fret. So if we wanted to choose 2 as the lowest fret for this, Finale will attempt to calculate these notes using the second fret or higher, except obviously there's a couple cases where it's impossible to use the second fret or higher, so then it will still use the 0 fret for the very low E there. All right, so depending on how you want the tab to appear, you can change this. And I'll show you how to change this default fret momentarily, but let's just show you that. Before I get much further, I do want to point out that, it really is the best way to change to a tab staff by selecting in the instrument column here or adding an instrument here and choosing the appropriate tablature staff. It is possible to manually change an instrument to tablature. This is a normal guitar staff here, this guitar 2. You can actually change the notation style directly to tablature here, but there's a couple weird things that happen. First of all, it will pull up the tablature staff attributes automatically because it doesn't automatically know which instrument you want to use, first of all. So you'll have to choose one of these instruments. And then the second thing is that there's this option on the bottom that I want to talk about called on OK reset staff attributes to tablature defaults. When you check this, Finale will automatically change the staff lines to be the appropriate number of staff lines for the standard guitar. It will also make those changes in the staff attributes that I showed you where some things are unchecked. So if you're going to do it this way by changing the notation directly to tablature here and choosing the instrument from this, I recommend definitely checking this, otherwise some weird things are going to happen. In fact, if I uncheck it, I'll show you exactly what happens. So now we're showing notation style tablature for this guitar 2 part, but you'll see some weird things in this guitar 2 part. There's no key signature, but there is actually, it's showing key signature because key signatures don't make sense in tablature, so it doesn't really know what to do with that. It's also showing some of these other things that it's not supposed to, the augmentation dot, etc. And obviously the staff lines are not the same, and the rests are showing all this stuff. So really not a good idea to switch directly to tab without that checked. So if we do check that, then things change. So the staff now has 6 lines and the right spacing and everything. So that's sort of what's going on with that. So again, I recommend if you're going to change to a tab staff, definitely try and do it from the instrument column or the add instrument setup here. So let's talk about some of the settings in the notation style tablature setup here. The very first thing is the instrument. You can actually choose whatever instrument you want. And there's an option here to edit the instruments. In the next video, I'm going to show you how to customize your own fretboard instrument using this fretboard instrument definition dialog box. I'll show you how to do that. But once you have that, and actually this guitar half step down is something I created. I'll show you how to do that in the next video. But once you have your instrument set, you can sort of choose it from this list. For now, we'll just stick with standard guitar. And so there's some options here. I talked about the default lowest fret as being 0. This is sort of how it's going to set up most of the time. But if you wanted to change that default lowest fret to 2, now when we go, actually I have to delete that and recopy and paste. Using the staff's default lowest fret, which is 2, so now it's going to do that calculation that I showed you earlier where it's trying to use the second fret as the lowest possible fret. Of course, you can always override that by specifying the lowest fret to 0 still, so you get a normal looking tab notation there. But anyway, that's what the default lowest fret is. I actually don't really know why you might want to change that to something other than 0, but it's possible. The capo position is something slightly different. So if we change this to 1, for example, so now you're telling Finale that your guitarist has a capo on the 1st fret, is what this does. And this will make a little bit more sense if we go. Well, now you can see that Yeah. So what's happening is that the 0 becomes the first fret essentially, right? And some of these notes are actually not even possible with the capo on the first fret. Like these E's, these lower E's right here are impossible because you can't get that note. So this actually will make more sense if I change to F major. Let's just do that real quick. F major, go up. So now when I copy and paste this into the tab staff, specify lowest fret 0. Again, it's going to show the 0 as being the F, right? Because the capo is on the first fret. So that's what's going on here. And in fact, if I go and undo that and change the capo position to 0, so now there's no capo, and now we're still in F major, and now the fret numbers are reflecting that the fact that there's no capo, and this last chord is showing as sort of a bar chord in the tab staff. Let's go back to E major for a second. So that's what's going on with the capo number there. Some other options here. Show tuplets. So this will only sort of make sense if I have that checked. If I try and copy and paste this passage here, specify lowest fret 0, that's fine. It sort of only makes sense if you're showing stems. Now, this is why you can sort of see the triplet with the bracket will sort of show up correctly, but here's the triplet for this eighth note triplet, which doesn't really look right at all. But it makes a little bit more sense if you're actually showing the stems. So now you can actually see the triplets. So a couple options there if you want to do that. The show clef only on first measure. I think this is a standard notation for tablature, is to only show the clef on the first measure. But if you don't want to do that, you can uncheck that. And now your tab clef will appear on the second system and beyond. And of course, that's specific. See, I didn't change it in the banjo, so it's not showing. So that's another option there. Incidentally, there is a document option setting for clefs that's similar to this, but it behaves a little bit differently. In the clefs option, there's this display clef only on first staff system. And if you check that, it actually applies to all instruments. So now you see my clef disappear on all of those instruments. So that's more of a global setting. And let's see, it does actually affect that tab staff as well. So the tab staff option to do that is sort of unique to the tab staff notation style. So let's go back and show clef only on first measure. And then we'll talk about the fret numbers. Now there's a vertical offset. This will have to do with the numbers in relation to the staff lines. Let me just zoom in here a little bit. Now the setting that Finale has for this particular font is just perfectly fine. The numbers are pretty much centered. But if you're using a different font, it's possible you might need to choose a different vertical offset. And this just works, negative numbers go upwards, positive numbers go downwards. And I think the 0 setting will put the bottom of the number on the string itself, which, right, yeah, it wouldn't look exactly right that way. But again, if your fonts are slightly different, you might need to do a different vertical offset, but I think it was 0.0555. There's also the option to use letters instead of numbers, which is from what I can understand is used in certain instruments. You might want to use letters instead of numbers, and when you have that checked, you'll actually see letters. And they'll always be lowercase, by the way. There's no way to actually change that to uppercase letters. And incidentally, you can see with these letters that they're not exactly centered, so that might be a reason to use that offset differently if you're using the letters. Let's go back here. Break tablature lines at numbers sort of does exactly what you would think. If you uncheck that, the tab lines themselves will draw straight through the numbers, as opposed to, if we have that checked, there's a little bit of a break in the numbers, which makes more sense. Incidentally, the place where you can actually change the font for these fret numbers here is in the document options, under fonts, under notation, and it's a third option here for tablature. So you can see that it's out of the box, it's set to Arial 11 bold, but we can change this to whatever you want. We can unbold it and change it to 12, for example. Let's see what that looks like. And you'll see the numbers will change. So that's exactly where that font is set. And that's sort of a global setting, so you can't actually have different fonts on different tab staffs in your file. Unfortunately, you're kind of stuck with one tab font for every tab staff. And I believe, is that all the options in the settings? Yep, other than the on OK reset staff attributes to Tablature defaults, which we talked about earlier. So again, that's what that does. So yeah, that's Tablature Staff. The one thing I did want to show you is that you can actually switch to tab staffs mid-score from a normal staff. So if we just select that measure and choose the utilities, change instruments, we can change to a tablature instrument here. We can go to a 4-string based tab if we really wanted to. And you'll see that now we have a different type of staff here. This is the tab staff. And of course, we can always go back at any point, just choose another measure, change instrument, plucked string, bass guitar, and it will go back to the normal notation bass guitar instrument there. So it is possible to actually switch back and forth between tab and non-tab if you, for some reason, really wanted to try and do that. For some reason, that's possible. And yeah, I think that covers the basics of the tab staff in the score manager. In the next video, come back. I'm going to show you how to edit your own fretted instrument, so that will be fun. So come back for that, and yeah, we'll go from there. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon on the next video.